Engineers used cutting-edge technologies to build a 260-ton bomber that could outrun a fighter jet. To make this feat possible, 6 afterburning turbojets were fed air through a sophisticated intake. The engines were optimized to run most efficiently at high supersonic speeds, and they were powerful enough so that even if one were to fail, the Valkyrie could still maintain Mach 3 and complete its mission. But clever aerodynamics were also key to performance, with compression lift giving the Valkyrie one of the highest lift-to-drag ratios of any manned aircraft. Variable geometry wings improved stability and enhanced compression lift. On takeoff and landings, they could be fully extended, at low supersonic speeds, angled downwards 25 degrees, and at multi-Mach speeds, a full 65. But flying at 3 times the speed of sound, kinetic heating on the airframe would be so intense, it would soften conventional aircraft aluminum. So engineers developed a revolutionary fuselage skin and circulated fuel throughout the airframe to cool the aircraft's interior. Even at an altitude of 75,000 feet, the Valkyrie's cockpit was fully pressurized and featured an innovative encapsulated escape system. It meant that the bomber's crew of 4 wouldn't have to put on bulky flight suits, allowing a Valkyrie crew to get airborne in only 20 minutes. Capable of delivering a nuclear payload to anywhere in the world in just hours, the Valkyrie's performance was truly out of this world, and the bomber would embody America's strategy of deterrence through strength. The first experimental XB-70 prototype was unveiled in May of 1964, with flight testing to begin in the following months, and it would soon be joined by a second and third prototype, both already under construction. But from the start, it was clear that things wouldn't go so smoothly. During initial ground tests, there were so many technical problems. The first flight was delayed for months, while engineers sorted through a laundry list of issues. It wouldn't be until September 21st that the XB-70 was finally ready to make its first flight, and cheers could be heard as the space-aged bomber lifted off for the very first time. But celebrations were short-lived, because a hydraulic leak prevented the landing gear from retracting, and soon one of the engines surged, forcing a shutdown. As the prototype came back in for a landing, a brake locked up, causing a tire to blow out and catch fire. It seemed just as one problem was solved, more would emerge. On October 12th, the XB-70 crossed the sound barrier for the very first time, just barely inching above Mach 1. But as flight tests continued, paint began peeling off the fuselage and control surfaces, and soon the aircraft looked like it had flown through a sandblaster. The paint was patched up and the XB-70 pushed on to higher speeds. But with each test flight, it seemed the faster it flew, the more serious the issues became. On its 12th test flight, as the prototype reached Mach 2.6, the horizontal splitter tore off and was sucked into the engine duct, knocking out 4 engines. The pilots landed safely, but all of the engines had to be replaced. Finally, on October 14th, the aircraft was cleared to reach Mach 3. But just 2 minutes in, a large portion of the wing's leading edge broke off, forcing yet another emergency landing. From that point on, the first prototype was limited to flying at no more than Mach 2.5. In developing such a state-of-the-art aircraft, there were bound to be setbacks. But there was a much bigger problem looming over the program. From the very start, there were serious doubts about whether the Valkyrie would really be safe from Soviet air defenses, because surface-to-air missiles introduced in the mid-1950s were quickly becoming the most effective way to guard airspace. And by the 1960s, the Soviet Union had thousands of them, which could hit targets beyond even the XB-70's altitude. The introduction of ICBMs in the late 1950s also meant that nuclear warheads could now be delivered much more quickly and economically. In the span of just a few years, missile technology had rendered the world's most advanced bomber virtually obsolete. With the XB-70's strategic value in serious question, engineers scrambled for ways to keep the plane relevant, sketching out radical concepts to repurpose the bomber into a missile launcher, an aerial launch platform for spacecraft, or even a supersonic aerial refueler. Even more outlandish was a proposal that would turn the bomber into a Mach 3 supersonic transport. But these concepts proved to be a bridge too far, and the program was dramatically scaled back, eventually reduced down to a bare minimum research project involving just 2 aircraft. But with millions already spent on development, the program pushed forward, and in 1966, NASA joined the Air Force in flight testing, using the prototypes to gather valuable research into supersonic flight. By that point, the second prototype had proven to be a much more capable plane. On May 19, 1966, it reached speeds beyond Mach 3, demonstrating its ability to cruise at 3 times the speed of sound for over 30 minutes. After nearly a decade of development, one of the world's most ambitious aircraft was finally living up to expectations. But tragedy would strike just weeks later. On June 8th, the second prototype was joined by 4 other aircraft for a formation flying photo op. But minutes into the flight, without warning, one of the trailing aircraft collided with the XB-70, instantly destroying it and severely damaging the Valkyrie's vertical stabilizers. For 16 seconds, the Valkyrie continued flying straight and level before spiraling back to Earth. In a matter of seconds, 2 test pilots and a billion-dollar aircraft were tragically lost. It was a devastating setback for the program, and it meant NASA and the Air Force would have to continue research with the much less capable original prototype. The XB-70 was an engineering marvel, and while it never joined America's bomber force, it still had a profound impact on the Cold War. Because in 1955, when the Soviet Union learned that the Americans were developing a supersonic long-range bomber, they scrambled to develop an equivalent, and it would end up as one of the most fearsome-looking aircraft ever built. But looks can be deceiving. In an effort to match the Americans, the Soviets ended up producing an embarrassing failure, one that they would keep hidden for decades.